Sounds weird.
Yeah, my phone's good.
Is it weird?
My face is so good.
No? Yeah, no, I don't hear. No, I don't think it's weird.
Okay.
It'll be alright.
Do you have a file? What file?
What do you see?
Oh, yeah.
Get back. Yeah, man.
What do you see?
Your flash drive is so sad.
Judge, ready?
Yep.
All right.
It's 3 advantages.
I'll be fine.
Plan the United States to legalize near prostitution and ban influential health sex workers are disproportionately burdened by the risk of HIV and AIDS. 14. Sex workers constitute a disproportionate burden of HIV. Decriminalization would have the largest impact on the course of HIV epidemics by averting 33 to 46% of HIV infections in the next decade. HIV brought new attention for the needs of sex workers to access safe sex materials to stop the transmission of HIV. Criminal laws played a large role in frustrating the ability of sex workers to access public health tools preventing HIV. And 650,000 people in the U.S. have died from AIDS and millions more are infected. Testing and treatment is crucial to save lives. Kaiser Family Foundation. 14. 1.8 million people in the U.S. have been infected. 650,000 people have already died. Today, 1.1 million people are living with HIV. New infections have remained at 50,000 for a decade. HIV testing is important for prevention and treatment. Treatment reduces AIDS-related mortality and extends lives. Many people are not on treatment. And police policies in support of anti-prostitution laws discourage sex workers from accessing the protections the rest of the population has available. HRW 12. Reported high rates of HIV among sex workers are an urgent priority. Cities gave condoms, but the police are taking them out of the hands of those who need them the most. Police and prosecutors defended the use of condoms as evidence to enforce anti-prostitution laws and help obtain convictions against sex workers. Enforcement should not interfere with the right of workers to protect their health. And legalizing sex work decreases HIV and sexually transmitted diseases by half. 14. Infection rates among sex workers could be reduced by half if professional legalized. Decriminalization of sex work would have a large impact of HIV epidemic among sex workers over 10 years. Policymakers can no longer ignore the evidence. Rates of infection could be easily reduced, so they no longer need to fear what will happen if they seek care. Where prostitution is not allowed, many avoid using them, which is the worst effort to contain HIV. Sex workers face the highest risk and are 14 to 50 times more likely to contract the disease than other adults. Legalization allows sex workers to access the stability of treatment without fear of jail. And legalizing prostitution is crucial to protect sex workers from HIV. 14. Laws can help sex workers stay healthy while selling sex. Sex workers constantly intersect with the police and law. Where sex work is legal, the focus on policing is on reducing violence, protecting sex workers, and supporting effective HIV programming. Such enlightened responses reduce the vulnerability to HIV and should be followed elsewhere. There is no alternative. If we wish to reduce the environmental risk faced by women, men, and transgender people worldwide, and a lack of knowledge of HIV sex precludes health. CDC 13. 18.1% of U.S. adults living with HIV were unaware. Sex workers are not aware of services such as HIV testing. They may not know if they are infected. They may also be uncomfortable with testing. If questioned about their sexual history, some workers know, but may be reluctant to seek care because of mistrust of the healthcare system. And U.S. signal is critical to the global fight against HIV and AIDS. 14. Less than 1% of global funding for HIV prevention is being spent on HIV and sex work due to abolitionists who disrupt important health initiatives. The Bangladeshi organization Shuttered and Centers for Sex Workers after the international NGO from which it received funding signed the U.S. anti-prostitution pledge. DWP distanced itself from a project in the Cambodia Vietnam border after the U.S. congressional testimony criticized it for promoting sex work. And 22 million people have died from AIDS worldwide. UN report by the end of 2002, 42 million people were living with HIV and AIDS. 22 million people had already lost their lives to AIDS. And unchecked AIDS results in extinction. Walk it in 7. The survival of the human race is now being threatened by HIV. It is a perennial problem that affects all aspects of humanity, threatening the existence of the human race. The implications of this pandemic on the global economy are dire. It's expected to reverse the gains made in social and economic development, and every individual will be affected. And advantage 2, child sex trafficking. 300,000 children in the U.S. are at risk of sex trafficking each year, Adams 10. In the U.S., 300,000 children may become victims of commercial sexual exploitation each year, and legalizing sex work is crucial to stopping child sex trafficking, Amendment 14. Currently, efforts to save children from the sex industry are neither safe nor fair. Correcting that poor record will mean respecting and engaging adult sex workers and their advocates as part of the solution, not the problem. After all, sex workers are often the first to notice being coerced into selling sex, including children, or they are the first individuals whom trafficking victims reach out to for help. And full legalization solves sex trafficking. Partial criminalization violates the rights of sex workers, D1 and 12. Decriminalization will protect against sexual exploitation of minors. The key benefit of decriminalization is a vast improvement in the relationship between police and sex workers, to the point that sex workers become key information sources in an attempt to uncover human trafficking. Currently, sex workers are afraid to do so because they risk arrest. People tend to forget that sex workers are also community members, and many of us are concerned with crime. If sex work gets decriminalized, it would be in a better position to assist the police combat crime. And sex trafficking is the worst form of human rights abuse. Hawaii 3. Sex trafficking is the ugliest and most preventable man-made disaster in our world today. Children are victimized by sex trafficking. Trafficking is a horror one only encounters in nightmares. In a Southeast Asian country, children between the ages of 6 and 12 were made available to be raped and molested. And respect for human rights is a moral and legal imperative, even in an effort to stop terrorism. Amnesty International 5. Governments have a duty to prevent atrocities while fully respecting human rights. Respect for human rights is not optional in efforts to defeat terrorism. Rights to combat terrorism must be grounded in respect for human rights. And the international community has a moral obligation to fight human rights abuses in order to preserve humanity. Case 4, the UN and powerful countries that fail to curb state terrorism. The international community has a moral obligation to fight wrongs. To say the world is unwilling to ameliorate any nation's maltreatment of its citizens is an embarrassment to everything good and human. And legalization solves all problems, status quo criminalization, and disaster decriminalization. White 13, this is our solvency. What we think we know about prostitution may be colored by research confined by how it manifests under criminalization rather than where it is legal. Many public policies are based on ignorance. There's no reason why sexual commerce cannot be viewed and treated like other work. What makes it different is the stigma of stereotypical assumptions about participants and conditions. The first step in normalizing prostitution is that consensual adult prostitution be officially recognized as work and that participants be accorded the rights and protection available to those involved in other occupations. Draconian punishments for consenting adults who exchange sex for money compel them to operate underground. Both parties risk victimization and exploitation. Quote, sex is legal, selling is legal. Why is selling sex illegal? The criminalization model of the reigning system, no society has adopted a policy of pure decriminalization. Legal brothels not operating in Queensland law provide a sustainable model for healthy, crime-free, and safe legal licensed brothel industry. And legal brothels and sole operators have little adverse impact on the local community. Quote, 70% of legal workers and experts said they would, quote, definitely choose such work over again, and half felt the work was, quote, a major source of satisfaction. Sex workers should not be forced to register or be licensed by the authorities. Such attempts have failed everywhere they have been attempted. Their owners should be subject to rigorous background checks. Operators should be licensed, and these licenses should be subject to renewal. Institutional decriminalization against prostitutes and business operators should be illegal. Workers and owners should have the same rights as the participants in other commerce, filing increased penalties to anyone who engages in exploitation or abuse. Too often, law enforcement has turned a blind eye away from instances of harassment, payment, assault, robbery, and rape of sex workers. Robust punishment for these criminals and a hopefully deterrent message that would-be partners that they will be held accountable. A regulatory system built on these and some additional restrictions is far superior to either criminalization or unregulated decriminalization. It guarantees workers' rights and enhances their health and safety. It imposes vital oversight over business owners, and it will attract much more public support than a policy of simple unrestricted decriminalization. And according to sex workers, legalizing prostitution is the only way for workers to freely choose their work and achieve recognition as members of the community. The Urban Justice Project 5. Respondents overwhelmingly believe that if conditions for sex work would be different if all sex work, including prostitution, was legal. 79% of respondents felt this way. Participants often related their lack of respect and assistance from the police to prostitution's unlawful status and felt that sex workers would be in a better position to organize and assist each other to live in better conditions or leave the industry if sex work was legal. Respondents also saw health benefits, and many noted that sex work could pay taxes on their labor, thereby contributing to the larger community and enabling them to establish Social Security and retirement plans. And in the context of prostitution law, legal changes are powerful symbols that spur national discussion and reform. How the Cobalt 11. A legal rule promoting equality has important educative, symbolic, and expressive value. It is in part through moral persuasion and debate created by legislation that attitudes and behaviors will change. And advantage-free stigma. Representation of the status quo create cognitive frames for understanding the sex industry has empirically led to policymakers crafting policies that serve their own political agendas that fail to address the needs of sex workers. Dicellus 13. Representation of sex workers as criminals have influenced research. There is a disproportionate focus on the harms of sex work instead of research on empowering aspects. Missing is the involvement of sex workers' voices. These studies contribute to the homogenization of sex workers as a single group, which is not representative of individuals and their varied experiences. This gaps due to the difficulty that some researchers have on understanding positive reasons for choosing sex work. This results in the perception of sex workers as victims who could not possibly choose this work. Research on sex work shaped the focus of the general public from a stigmatized population, and the stigma of prostitution has put them in a position of social death. Augustine 13. 14. Society proceeds to discredit this stigmatized by calling them deviants or abnormal. Granted, we stigma people may even suffer social death, if not in a non-existence in the eyes of society, if not physical death. Most dismissing the possibility that women who sell sex can be rational and autonomous. Excuses followed a pattern, quote, nothingness that could be relied on. Giving these women spoiled identities, others who feel called to speak for them. Abolition of the virgin prostitution strengthens the stigma, despite the prostitute's demotion to the status of victim rather than the transgressor she once was. And stigma against prostitution justifies rape, murder, endless violence, and requires stacked bodies before the violence is even acknowledged. Go to. The popular quote, forced versus voluntary distinction leads to the bifurcation of the modern prostitute and has been incorporated to abuse sex workers' rights. Prostitutes continue to be reduced to a disembodied stereotype, a one-dimensional object without individual identity. Quote, nothing but a prostitute. Police and other public officials demonstrate little interest in pursuing crimes against prostitutes since the prostitute victimizer does not warrant the time or the cost. A police officer turned prostitute making, quote, police and society do not seem to care. They feel that since these women are prostitutes, they deserve whatever they get rather than go after the murderers. The state spends millions of dollars trying to round up prostitutes and does nothing against those who violate the rights given out to start the current paradigm of prostitutes and prostitutes into women as a class. Any prostitution policy must alter this construction or eradicate it altogether and disgrace conditions for endless violence and magnifies every other type of oppression from crack to 13. Conditions surrounding street-based sex work, increased oppression, violence, policing, increased criminalization, marginalization based on their sex. These individuals have no protection against violence, rape, and death. Deaths and sex work are common because men are likely to get away with attacks on the prostitute. Cut the card there. And now stand ready for cross-examination.
Which one did you not for?
I made it to the second to last card, right before this lack of social power.
Okay. All right. So does your plan specify any regulations for?
Yeah, that's our white cert 13 card.
And what kind of regulations?
They have to be consenting legal adults. The brothels will be, or however you want to call it, the business owners will be highly regulated.
Right. Does your plan text specifically state any regulations though?
Well, I think if we did in our plain text, it would take up our entire 1AC of just regulations, because we're not running
So
those
you're
here.
just relying on the fact, on your budget 13, you're just saying that like, if it's legalized, regulations are sure to follow?
No, it
No.
specifically lists the regulations.
It's this-
Those are the regulations for our plan. We just didn't put it in our plan text because
Right.
having an 8 paragraph.
So you said this is with consenting adults, right?
Yes.
So then what's up with the child trafficking? Can you tell me how children are going to be, like, why they won't be trafficked?
Yeah, absolutely, because the sex workers are going to be at the front lines of this problem. They see this happening and they want to come forward, but right now they would be prosecuted in the status quo. Post-plan, that won't occur anymore. They
Right
can
now,
simply
you're
come
telling
forward
me-
about instances of trafficking.
So why are children trafficked right now?
There are multiple reasons why children are trafficked.
Why are children trafficked for sex work?
Because we don't have a legal form
Is
for
there a
consenting
demand?
adults, and so there's no.
Is there a demand for child prostitutes?
There's an illegal demand, yes.
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 Okay. Also, you're saying that they would want to come forward if it's legalized. You're telling me a child who is being exploited sexually, if he came forward, would be prosecuted instead of helped?
No, the child wouldn't be prosecuted because it's not consensual.
So,
The
and
adult sex
the
workers?
adult sex workers would come forward.
right, but the child, that would not, like if the child right now was being exploited sexually and came forward, he would have, or he or she would have,
Our cards talk about that the sex workers are often the ones that children will go to. And
Okay.
those sex workers
Okay,
report
I
it.
see.
And we're also talking about increased police relations because right now the police has to prosecute them.
Okay, can we go to stigma?
Sure.
So are you saying that stigma is going to be completely eliminated once it's legalized?
Not necessarily. We don't know because we haven't enacted the plan yet.
So-
But that's what we would like to think.
what's the impact to your stigma?
Now, it's endless violence and oppression.
Okay, and then also with your
Social
health
death.
advantage, are you basically claiming to solve for all of AIDS and HIV?
Not necessarily. If you look at our Kuhner card, we talked about decreasing HIV and AIDS by half.
Yeah, and then you said something about like the international community is basically going to like.
Also, how are you planning on implementing this plan? Which branch of government are you using?
We're gonna, well, prostitution legislation right now is on the state level, so that's more than likely where we would institute the law.
You're doing this on the state level?
Well, through fiat, there would either be an opt-in system, the states could legalize it through there, but it's gonna be the 50 United States because that's where the legislation currently rests. Thank you.
Are you taking
Yeah, we're gonna take.
Yes.
bad as it sounds. It just, we have to, yeah.
Yeah. That's all I said.
Okay.
You're jumping, right?
Yes.
Could you write your prep on the board? Sure. Thanks. Never seen question.
Sorry, a lot of professors use a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And they write on the PowerPoint, so they don't use them a lot.
All right, as long as it's written somewhere. I have it written down. All
It's not
right,
right.
cool. I don't need to see it or whatever, I just don't want you to forget it, that's all.
That's the negative proton.
Okay. What's it labeled?
I want to see.
Oh, sorry.
Should be the only thing on the left.
There's a couple other things, but it doesn't look like that.
No, I thought it was. Okay.
What's the roadmap?
So the roadmap is 5 off.
Not here.
Yeah, don't worry, it's not as.
I'm sure it won't be.
And then it'll be health, stigma, trafficking, and then if I have time, it'll be stop and save.
HIV, stigma.
Trafficking.
And then if you have time for tolerances. Anyone want to lay down money as to whether or not she has time to get this tolerances?
Let's see. All right, do you guys put that in?
Yep.
Judge ready?
Mm-hmm.
Bonus ready? Kumar?
Yep.
First, expect the app to specify who passes the plan, vote, neg round. We lose specific counterplans such as the case arguments, condo, not specifying the laws to seek clarification, move links next off. L-spec, they read the resolution, not the plan. They must specify beyond legalized, vote, neg. It makes the plan void for vagueness and undermines policy analysis. Figure 90. Prominent inadequacy of legalization arguments is the failure to specify what is meant by legalization. Legalization proposals rarely of legalization depend entirely on the details of the regulatory crime. Next off, courts counterclaim. The United States Supreme Court should rule that nearly all prostitution is legal. Courts are invisible to the American public. Slotnick and Siegel 98. The Supreme Court is a uniquely invisible institution with the eyes of the American public. There is only a shallow reservoir of knowledge about the court in the mass public. Few fulfill the most minimal prerequisites of the role of a knowledge and competent citizen vis-a-vis the court. Many Americans little recognize or little remember the court's rulings and Supreme Court can set policy that results in significant change. E-Roll 10. Supreme Court is able to set policy through legal interpretations exist in a constitution that makes it possible for the court to set policy through its use of judicial review. The court is able to set policy that results in significant changes. Next off, midterms. GMU is likely to win both goals and fundamentals. Sabato 10-29. While races remain close, it's harder to envision the path for Dems to retain the Senate. Well, just a few days ago, the safe bet would be on Republicans. Republicans have polls leading of more than 3 points above the GOP targets is a reflection of the structural advantage that have favored Republicans. And legalizing prostitution is popular among Dems, creates a rallying point. You have 11. Americans have different views about legalizing prostitution. Culture to more positive. 42% are down to legalize prostitution, and there's massive support for legalizing prostitution. Question 12. The Global Commission on HIV issued a report. We asked the public if prostitution should be legal. 2/3 think prostitution should be legal. And GP is key to free trade. GRI 14. A Republican takeover could break the policy deadlock between Obama and Congress. The leadership would come under greater pressure to demonstrate results. These conditions will create unique incentives for both to devise compromise. The White House has been stymied in efforts to rejuvenate global free trade talks. Congress has refused talks to provide fast track to TIP. Accountability for voters, and protectionism causes extinction. Cancer 8. Protectionist legislation triggers economic response, which turn down to a global disaster. Restriction on trade will certainly intensify. Many nations are making transporting funds difficult. Those efforts will cause spasms to ripple across economies and markets. This will continue to undermine business confidence. The rise in protectionism will bring dangerous confrontations over shared sources of oil, gas, and other key commodities. Efforts to secure adequate supplies will take increasing precedence. Pollution of the environment will become commonplace. Such tensions will give rise to full-scale military encounters with minimal provocation. Terrorist groups will boost the frequency and scale of their attacks. China will likely assume an increasingly belligerent posture towards Taiwan. Israel may draw allies into conflict. Long-simmering resentments could degenerate, triggering genocidal acts. Terrorists deploying nuclear weapons will vie with conventional forces to cause widespread destruction. And next off, MK. Patriarchy is a system of power that holds the masculine bias have power over feminine, i.e. the strong have power over the weak. Legalization of prostitution is the wrong starting point. Prostitution is rooted in patriarchy and violates the rights and dignity over those involved. Frisian 13. Prostitution cannot be a freely made choice. Most women in prostitution do not have viable alternatives. Gender, social class, and sexual abuse history define prostitution. Prostitution is paid rape. Prostitution is violent and dangerous and exploitative and destructive and sexual slavery. We cannot allow rape. It's a violation of a person's human right and male violence towards men. Most women in prostitution are poor and often racially marginalized. Women from imagination of stereotype as hypersexually, easily and constantly accessible as a rare commodity for sexual exploitation. Most women in prostitution want to leave but do not know how to. She is stigmatized, dehumanized, used up, socially excluded, and deprived of dignity. Most criminalized by the legal system. Most suffer from PTSD, STDs, HIV, AIDS, and/or physical injuries. And the illusion that prostitution is a choice is manipulative and deceptive. And gendered understandings as a result of patriarchy are the root cause of prostitution. Resisting patriarchy is the ultimate ethical strategy to prevent violence and war. Status quo guarantees violence on a global scale. Workman 96. The practice of war emerges within gendered understandings. Gender constructs are constructive of war. They derive it. Wars are understanding of man and women and the subordination of the feminine to the masculine. Both sex and war are constituted among understandings of male domination and female subordination. The language is bound are mutually reinforcing and easily interchangeably. Sex and war are manifestation of gendered notions of power over submission, inequality, injury, contamination, and destruction. Practices are integral expressions of patriarchal culture and proximate to its reproduction. And the alternative is to reject patriarchy through thought produced by hierarchies and power. This allows us to begin to redefine the way we think in academic spaces as a prerequisite to repositioning and reorienting ourselves in academic activities. Like debate 12 and 10. Feminists cannot escape gendered history, but we can destabilize it. Discursive facts cannot be known in advance or assumed. How is it that the objective make their claim through and against discourses that have sought their repudiation? By looking closely at the argument, feminists socioforensic discursive analysis. All right, on the health. The alt causes maintaining illegal prostitution, the lack of health and social services post-athletic and COVID-9. Even if sex work is to be decriminalized and legalized, many things might not change. Other legal codes, loitering, trespassing, public nuisance, and narcotics would be used to target sex workers. Decriminalization or legalization would likely not eliminate the stigma. Changes in the criminal code would not guarantee access to health or social services. And the act pushes street prostitution farther underground and ensures ongoing spread. Chapter 6. One misconception that street level and indoor prostitution are similar. Many street prostitutes are driven there because of circumstances of poverty, homelessness, and the need to pay for substances such as months of medication. The majority of women who engage in street-level prostitution would be excluded from working on legalized brothels because they couldn't pass the mandatory health screening. Just because they couldn't do it legally doesn't mean that they should stop prostituting themselves, because the issues that brought them to the streets would still be there. They would go underground and sell sexual services for reduced prices. There will always be somebody willing to pay less for those services. And mandatory health checks don't account for diseases in the purchaser and all causes. Romans 6. Pro-legislation groups argue the legalization for AIDS and HIV and STD and eye screenings. There is no compulsion for customers to undergo health checks, leaving the women vulnerable to infections. Men's health is protected. Service that benefits the customers. Prostituted women simply do not want an official record identifying themselves as registered prostitute. Germany identified 50,000 women registered as prostitutes and regularly seen by the health service. Further, 150,000 unregistered women work in prostitution. This means that a woman is not entitled to health care. The health of women is not protected, despite the argument that legislation will do so. There and condoms aren't always used. There's too much money at stake. Borrows 7. Many prostitutes prostitutes are able to negotiate condom use with their clients. Prostitutes are often paid more if they agree to have sex without a common condom. Prostitutes who regularly use condoms suffer from 79% reduction in their earnings. Cut the cord there, and go to stigma. There is not one piece of evidence in their entire affirmative that says the plan actually solves stigma. This entire advantage is just a nice FYI on how prostitutes get treated. If anything, this is a link to the critique because they attempt to hide the pervasiveness of the sex industry behind the guise of legalization. Stigma inevitable. Strippers get treated like social pariahs in their jobs are legal. Pedo 5. What is so wrong about being a prostitute that no justification seems to them acceptable? Indeed, the issue of promiscuity is often raised by conventional moralists to stigmatize the prostitute and usually sexist double standard. Counselor stigmatization of prostitution was just as clear as the moralists insofar as the former insisted that the lesser prostitutes always have their viable choices in the loo. There are two kinds of women. One will choose to be a prostitute, the other will not. I've met many prostitutes who claim that they were miserable, but I've also known women who are more miserable than these prostitutes who not prostitute themselves. Even miserable women are not hardened for their inner prostitution. There is no wonder that other sex workers who apparently have other choices are more stigmatized. Okay, going on to trafficking. No terrorist threat. Comprehensive data flow to NAG, Secure 13. Al-Qaeda is a shadow of its former self, battered by years in which Western and allied governments have attacked its leaders and tracked its money and followed its trail. It's lost political support in the Muslim world. The Taliban does not have global terrorist ambitions. Turning local threats into global terrorist groups would well prove to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. The war on terror seems to evolve into police work. That is a measure against Congress. Tax the job by 12%. That's part there. And trafficking inevitable. All causes like economy inequality contribute to no prostitution. On Monzini 5, the TPPA is a little more than a legal device to distinguish between the innocent victims of trafficking, largely children, largely white, and guilty immigrants, largely women, or largely non-white. Perhaps still, in purchase of sex on a global scale are not so fundamental to the problem of trafficking, perhaps more essential to the extreme international economy inequalities that exist in less than liberal immigration policies of liberated, affluent countries. And international key to solve F is insufficient. Corrigan 1. International sex trafficking flourishes because sex traffickers prey upon vulnerable women who seek to change their unequal sex in countries all over the world. Policies must be instigated at intermediate levels. Trafficking on women will be eradicated only through the legal measures to combat the problem in all nations. And Mexico ensures trafficking inevitable, or it makes the conditions worse for prostitutes. Nevada proves. Graham 10. Immigration is becoming a factor in the growth of human trafficking rings heightened by border security, forcing many Americans into.
Did you just say where you cut the card somewhere on there?
In the last card?
Yes.
Yeah, I cut it at heightened border security.
Okay, thanks.
All right, if the stigma is inevitable, how does your patriarchy case solve for stigma?
Because what we're doing is we're rejecting prostitution and we're rejecting patriarchy.
Right,
so
but if it's
that
inevitable, how do you solve?
it's inevitable in the status quo and with the act.
Okay. How are you solving for patriarchy in round?
In round.
Yeah, there's hierarchies in this round. There's going to be a winner and a loser, right? How do you solve for that?
Well, that's not the same kind of hierarchy that we're talking about. We're not talking
Okay.
about.
You said that in your Frisina searching evidence that they're poor, they can't choose. How is that not victimization? Especially if we say that 79% want this. How do you answer that? If 79% of sex workers want legalization and you're victimizing them, why should we prefer your lack of numbers?
First of all, we're not victimizing them. So we're saying that they.
You call them poor, they couldn't choose, they were unhealthy.
So the statistics show that a large part of the population that are prostitutes are driven to this because of financial instability and that sort of thing. So I'm not victimizing anyone. But anyway,
All right,
so
for the A-spec,
yeah.
did we specify in cross-ex?
No, you just said the government, which
You're-
is it.
I didn't say the states.
Nowhere in your plan does it say.
Oh yeah, so even if you said like the states, there's nothing in your plan text that's
All
going
right.
to like ensure the states.
The I-spec, so,
Sorry,
Can
it should
you-
be a capital L.
okay, the L-spec.
Yeah.
What are you arguing there? We must read beyond legalized, you want a 9-minute?
So it's a vagueness argument, basically saying that because
All right.
everything is so vague, it's going to
So what are your regulations through the courts, your counterclaim?
Well, the counterplan itself is just basically saying that like.
So you have no regulations?
We avoid the midterms as that, which is a specific point.
Okay, but what are your regulations in your counterclaim?
The counterplan doesn't the app.
If we have the White Sox 13 card showing all the regulations, where are your regulations?
The counterplan does everything that you're at.
So you're taking all of our regulations?
No, we're saying that we avoid the specific.
What case are you shooting down for your counterclaim?
Sorry?
What case? What case are you overturning?
We were saying the Supreme Court has historically been able to set policy measures.
So are you saying they're gonna write a bill?
The Supreme Court has historically been able to set policy measures.
Okay, so
You
right, your
say
midterms,
is already
on your
placed.
midterms,
Yeah.
why wouldn't the GOP win no matter what? Why is this the one factor?
Well, we're saying that Democrats are looking for a rallying point, a social rally.
42% of Dems like would legalize prostitution. So like if this is the kind of thing, like this is a huge point.
Okay,
for
so with
voters.
trade costs, oh, go ahead, sorry.
So yeah, so it's a huge point for Dem voters. So like if we were going to like release this to the public, like Dem voters would come in within these next few days and go ahead and vote Dem, and that's dangerous.
Right, but why would this affect their vote if they're already gonna vote them? Why would this change their vote?
No, this is gonna bring them out. Historically,
Yeah,
Democrats have a low turnout.
Yeah, but your cards don't say that.
Yeah,
What
it's
proof you
a
have?
rallying point, that means you're gonna.
That's your
more
tagline.
Yeah.
Where does your evidence sit?
All right,
Okay.
I'm gonna take some prep time. they're in red, we're in black.
I can't read it.
Okay, it's there.
That's all.
So the order is going to be our on case in order, and then their off case in order. And I will
Okay,
give you the document. Do you count prep time for what I'm trying to give them the document?
No, but when you
I'll
say
do-
on case in order, I want you to tell me the order, because it was a
Okay.
weird order in the first place.
Alright. Okay. So the order for our on case, actually, you know what, I'm going to give them the 5 real quick, and then that'll be. Okay, it's a little too easy. Should have labeled it too easy. Doves solve the dragons. All right, so on case, in order of our advantages, is going to be health, trafficking, stigma. Yeah. I'll give a summary of each of what we're saying and then address what they said specifically.
Just too easy.
Should be there.
Then what?
And then their off case. Do you want me to list the off case in order?
The order that you're gonna go in, yeah.
Okay. All right. A spec,
Okay.
L spec, counter plan, the court's counter plan, the midterms, patriarchy, and that's all of their off case.
Okay.
Too easy.
Can we keep track and show you the patriarchy?
What?
Just keep track and show you at least a minute for patriarchy.
Probably a minute and a half.
Okay, no. Just let me know. I'll try to keep it as big as I can. Everybody ready? Comments ready?
I don't know, probably.
Okay. Judge, are you ready? All right. Comments, you ready? Tim, let me know when you're ready. We'll do this thing.
All right, go ahead.
All right. Beginning with health, statistically notice that since people are dying from AIDS because of 14, a large percentage of these are sex workers. On 14, unlike this quote where policies discourage safe sex work practice, which is HRW 12, our act removes the stigma associated with sex workers, allowing them access to healthcare, protecting them and others from the spread of HIV, DAS 14, and future 14. This also creates our impact. Again, they talked about how our plan would move everything to the illegal sector, and that would just continue the HIV and the STDs. However, there's no one that we actually our plan. That's not true because our plan has incentives for the safety of the legal sector, the brothels. However, we're not saying the brothels are good or bad, just that there's an incentive there because it's safe. But we would still solve the illegal sector anyway. They would still have access to condoms and just like they would, and also it would solve the illegal sector where if they were being harmed by somebody who had an STD, they would still be able to go to the police, and the police, as indicated in our plan, would be able to help them. Again, they talked a lot about mandatory checks. That is not what our plan does. Statistically, when you force people to have mandatory health checks, they don't do it. When you allow them to take care of their own health, they do, and that's what our plan does. So that means that we do not increase disease. We allow them to take care of themselves. Again, they talked about the condoms wouldn't be used because people want the sex. However, the workers in our plan are the ones that are allowed to decide that. That means that's solved. They're allowed to choose to force their partners to wear the condoms. On child sex trafficking, they abstain of the enormous impacts on trafficked children. On Montana, that legalizing prostitution led sex workers who want to help solve this community problem, which is on 14 and Iguana 12. Stopping trafficking is a moral and legal issue. They said there was no terrorist threat, which is clearly a ridiculous argument. I please just want to talk about ISIS. There is a terrorist threat. However, they failed to recognize that we're not solving for terrorist threats. The argument there was that we solve for human rights violations, like terrorism. They said international cooperation is key. We can see that. I want to cross-apply our health card, which was Ahmed 14, that said that U.S. is a global signal. Our plan has a global impact. Again, trafficking is inevitable. That's not necessarily true. Our plan takes a step in the right direction to eliminate trafficking. On to stigma. The act argues that the stigma attached to sex workers affects our society, even politicians, which is still 13. The stigma puts them in a position of social death, making them like untouchables. August 13. Not only does this affect sex workers' position in society, but also affects the recurring cycles of violence they are subjected to. Why 13 showed very conclusively that legalization resolves this problem in this quo. Our urban justice project cards show that sex workers want legalization to solve the problems they currently face. We want to extend our evidence showing legalization is a conclusive way to solve the stigma attached to sex work. Again, they said that the stigma is inevitable. That's not true. Our health book talks about how legalization can actually begin the process of not only political change, but also societal change, which means we can solve in rounds. An example of that would be women workers. Women weren't allowed to work. It was considered a significantly, and that's exactly what our plan does. And again,
Cross-apply state inevitable to their patriarchy.
oh yeah, and cross-apply there's stigma inevitable to the patriarchy, okay? That basically that means you can't reject the patriarchy, you can't remove it. And again, something that I want to talk about that was specific in the argument is they said that the workers were forced to be sex workers. They don't have to be in our plan. If they don't want to be a worker because they feel like they're being stigmatized, we didn't give them education to access other options. I'm going to extend the McCracken 13 card that my partner read. This lack of societal power is key to understanding the violence prostituted women face and what can we must be done to end it. In this way, the victim, rather than the attacker, is blamed for the violence she suffers. Stigma combined with criminalization sends a powerful message that these individuals are not worth anything. A belief that is inherent in the lack of interest in pressing charges against the violence that is committed against them. The best of policies are not solving prostitution. The problem of prostitution is that worse they create the conditions for violence to occur. And sex workers, I'm on to A-spec. We specify the agents in the plan text, which was the United States. Our counter-interpretation, the United States means the whole country. Oxford Dictionary no date. The United States is a federal republic comprising 50 states and the District of Columbia. We meet our counter-interpretation. They didn't provide an actual interpretation. However, if they're just saying you didn't do anything at all, that's wrong. Education provides bad education because we can't learn about how it operates in real life. Compound condition, it makes the affirmative specify an active plain text, makes us sitting ducks for abusive alternative agent counterplans that thrive in the artificial competition that agent specification makes. Cross-examination checks abuse. They could have asked us how the plan was implemented. They did. My partner specifically said it's through the state. They could have even asked us before round. There's no in-round abuse. We haven't shifted out of any disadvantage or critique links. On to LSPEC. Cross-apply to their counterplan, please. And again, we are not vague. Tim mentioned specifically in the 1AC that Y13 had our regulations. That was even before cross-ex. And legalization involved regulation, didn't wear 11. Legalization of prostitution is typically accompanied by regulations primarily requiring, I'm gonna skip around a little bit. I'm so sorry. I'll let you know. Let's see. Yeah, I'm just gonna read that one statement right there. Legalization of prostitution is typically accompanied by regulations. The rest of the card doesn't actually apply to our specific plan. And prostitution has to be legalized by each state individually. Palestina 8. Legal status of prostitution is largely determined by each state. Prostitution is completely illegal in every state except Nevada. In Nevada, prostitution is highly regulated and only permitted in licensed houses in the less populated states. I'm going to cut the card there. On to the course counterplan. Perm do both. Perm do the plan and the all. The courts are not invisible. The courts are only linked to midterms, which means that their counterplan links to their own midterms. Americans do not trust the Supreme Court. Politics play too great a role in healthcare. Cut the card there. Again, there's no enforcement. This is a new card. Wheeler 8. In many cases, Congress ignored the court and continued to pass legislative vetoes. Both congressional and executive branch actors had their own preferences that overrode their motivation to implement the court's decision. And failure to specify grounds of the decision means it gets rolled back. Post 1. Judicial decisions which merely announce conclusions of law without referring to authority for such conclusions or offering reasons in support of them carry little weight. Such decisions have been finally overthrown. The judgment becomes a mere arbitrary exercise of power. No test case means that the court can't rule on it, which is terminal solvency. Additionally, while the courts can rule that prostitution is legal and constitutional, it can't have the regulations needed to prevent exploitation that the governments can. Only the permanent act can. This means they're promoting decriminalization. I want to cross-apply our Wiser 13 card to their court's counterplan. It talks about all the problems with decriminalization.
Cross-apply LSPEC.
Right, and cross-apply the LSPEC to that. Again, the McCracken card, in decrim, there's no incentives for the police to crack down on people who victimize sex workers. The Urban Justice Project cards talked about how sex workers want legalization, and it specifically used the word legalization. And again, I'm just going to skip the next card, which is Perrine, and I'm going to skip all the rest of the cards. I'm going to go on to the midterms. GOP went an inevitable backlash against Obama, Rother, 10-3. Obama's about to do what no president has done in the past 15 years, have 2 horrible midterm elections. Obama's likely to have the worst midterm number of any 2-term president. Obama had 1 midterm where his party lost 63 House seats, and Democrats are expected to lose another 5. Skipping down the bold, that would add up to Obama midterm Senate loses. And multiple numbers ensure Republican win, and voter ID laws ensure win. McCarthy, 10-3. Republicans appear poised to win a majority of seats. A number of broad factors are going against them, including near record low approval ratings and prospect of Democratic lawsuits stem from the retirement of key senators and the bad timing of having multiple re-election battles. Cut the card there. And no impact claim cannot determine election outcomes because absentee and early voting has already decided most cases. Fund 1019. Early and absentee voting are becoming the rule, not the exception. Nationwide, when 2 million people have already voted, in 35 states, people can vote early without having to give an excuse. Oregon, Washington, and Colorado have abolished the traditional polling place. A new poll by the Huffington Post found that nearly half of adults say they vote before election day, and a third say they do it often. And ISIS triggers and takes the Democratic approval ratings later 9-6. The midterm U.S. elections may have just gone national. Reading the bold made the difference of foreign and domestic policy an inescapable reality for candidates. It is more likely that candidates will latch onto the threat posed by the Islamic State and seek to paint their opponents as weak. And again, you can cross-apply this to the argument that there's no such thing as a terrorist threat. Yes, and analytical here, there are so many factors that go into who wins the election that the judgment places blame us solely for the entirety of their proposed impact. Onto the patriarchy. Okay, laws against prostitution reinforce hierarchical exclusion, reduce one's agency. Oh, before I can read the card. PERM, do both. PERM, do the plan, then the alternative, and then PERM, do the plan and reject all possible instances of patriarchy in this quote. Laws against prostitution reinforce hierarchical exclusion, reduce women's agency to a status of victimhood. Scholar and O'Neill 8. Political consensus offered by the construction of the prostitute subject as a victim of gender power is achieved by overlooking the complexities and contradictions inherent in prostitution, which point to wider structures, including law, which intersect, create its marginal status. It is vital to comprehend the dense sex work structures and processes that combine to understand prostitution better with a view to developing policy and practices based on social justice and inclusion. This also motivates criminalization, which they supported, which by saying that we should completely remove prostitution, that we should abolish it, which attempts to enforce back public elements of prostitution in the realm of private sexuality, thus keeping the economy and sexuality symbolically separated, maintaining the boundary between the forms of effective labor routinely assigned to.
What? Which parts did you not read?
Okay. On patriarchy?
Just don't know all of them.
Okay.
You didn't read the University 8 card, right?
Nope, not yet.
Yeah. Or you just got to the first card.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do the huge speech docs for future reference. Like you do a huge speech, you gotta know, all right? You gotta
Yeah.
start knowing what you can get
There was
to.
a
I know, so like that's why you gotta start picking and choosing, because it makes, if it's like in an open round, I'm actually like looking at the speech docs too. So like
Okay.
just for future reference,
Do you want
it's a
to-
bad practice. No, I don't care. I can hear you, I'm fine. But like it's a bad practice for future reference. Like,
Definitely.
if
Sorry.
some judge sees like some 72-page speech doc, they're gonna be like, come on,
Okay.
right?
All right. I think I spent too much time on
So
that.
take your time, make sure that they have what you actually read and didn't read, all right? And like, be
Okay.
cool, all right? I'm
All
not
right.
starting cross-sex until that's done.
Okay, then, did you read this over 14 card?
Nope.
Okay.
Did you read all your conditionality stuff?
Conditionality? I did not read the conditionality argument because you didn't state whether or not you're conditional.
Right.
Before taking out conditionality, which other card along the way did you not read?
Did you read this? Oh, like 8?
Yes.
Okay. Actually,
No, that one's the one I skipped, but because another card says exactly the same thing.
okay.
And you just read the first patriarchy card?
Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think we're going to need to move on.
Okay, so then you read this one here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Right. I read all the cards except the last card.
Alright, okay. Got there. Did you read this one? Yeah, 8?
Yes.
Okay. Alright, I know what you did not read.
I'm very, very sorry for that.
No, that's
I
fine.
complicated things together.
Are you ready to start cross-sex?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Alright, so I guess we can really go to, under LSPEC, was it where you brought up Nevada?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me exactly what's going on in Nevada?
We're not supporting Nevada. The whole thing with that one was just saying that it has to be determined by each state, and Nevada actually has ruled on the local county level to do that. But other than that, we're not supporting Nevada. It was
Okay.
just simply something that the
So, okay, also with ASPEC, like you saying that the states are going to do it, like what part of your plan is outlining, besides you just stating it, like how,
Right, well-
how is this actually going to be implemented? I'm confused.
Right,
If you say
there's
that
the general regulations that we talk about in our Rise and Routine card, then those would have to be implemented by the states, but the methods of implementations are up to the states themselves, but the general plan would be implemented by every state.
Also, if you're
So
doing
you're
about this,
fielding 50 states? Okay.
if you're doing
It's
about
fine.
the states, how are you?
Because you're
perming-
reading the courts kind of plan, which is exactly the same thing.
How are you perming a courts when you're sending your agent to states?
What?
How are you perming the Supreme Court counter?
Why can't I?
I mean, that's the federal government versus your state's initiative.
No, it's fine.
It's fine. There's no dichotomy.
Okay, so basically with midterms, you're basically just saying that the GOP is going to win because of all these other numbers. Is that the
Exactly.
essential argument? Okay. Let's go to. The FemK. So.
I've labeled it patriarchy.
Yeah, same thing. Are you under the impression that we're saying that we're going to outlaw all prostitution?
You actually did say that, The whole thing with rejecting it is, you specifically said abolishing prostitution, to quote.
So, okay. Would you say there's a difference between outlawing and rejecting?
You said reject patriarchy and.
No, I'm just wondering, like,
In the
would you
wording?
agree that there's a difference? Yes.
Rejecting is not necessarily political. Outlawing is.
Okay. Right.
So sure, there's a difference.
Okay. Kamar, do you have any specific questions? Oh, whoa. And the health advantage, you say, like, if you're not enforcing mandatory health checks, how is health actually going to be accounted for?
Exactly, because we give them the education and the access. So
people are just
education.
going to monitor their own health, like their own
No,
health,
not necessarily.
Except they'll be educated.
No, the brothels would have regulations providing the health requirements like the condoms.
So those are mandatory.
No mandatory checks for the workers. Statistically, that's a terrible idea.
Right, but you're
Alright.
mandatory checks for the brothels.
Right, there's regulations on the brothels.
What's the difference between that and your?
Do you want to take our time?
Yeah, we're gonna answer that. Yeah, sure, if you want to answer, go ahead.
All right, so could you just repeat the question real quick?
What's the difference between, sorry, go.
Yeah, what's the difference between providing regulations in brothels versus, like, individual mandatory checks? Like, I'm confused what it is that you're advocating for.
Right, we say that by providing, for each worker, for the workers, we provide them with the education and the resources and the ability to force their customers to wear condoms. With the brothels, we're saying there would be health regulations. That would just be like any other business, like safety
Okay.
codes and
Okay,
whatnot.
I got you.
Okay.
If you guys would like, I can put together, y'all, sorry, I can put together another document with the ones that I did read, if that would be helpful for you to refer back.
That's okay, I have it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Very sorry about that.
No, you're totally good. Okay. Okay.
stucco. I'm just gonna jump it up.
Let's see where.
All right, I'm gonna do courts, midterms, trafficking, health, stigma.
Courts, midterms, trafficking, health, stigma. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
All right, you guys ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Judge, you ready? Laura? The fun. Courts. Supreme Court action creates congressional follow-on in Rule 10. Courts set the precedent decision in Brown v. Boards of Education to motion awareness of problems. It enabled Congress to pass anti-discriminatory legislation. If the court had not decided against separate but equal doctrine, would Congress or the executive have acted? The Supreme Court is able to produce changes. It is very hard to determine the direction that abortion, civil rights, or criminal rights would have taken if the Supreme Court had not taken actions. Policymakers. Court has an importance in placing issues on the agenda of the branches, and the court has provided legitimacy to certain issues as well as to serve to mobilize individuals. And courts are external to Washington policy, CSM 97. Members of the court don't need to campaign. They are free to dissent. Congress is covered by TV 4 times as much as the court. White House is 8 times as much. The court stands out because it is not part of Washington political swamp. Courts words don't show. It seems less political. And fiat stalls, it should. We no difference than the bill in Congress for. You don't need to testify. This is with regards to rollback. Don't need to test case, O'Brien 5. Congress gave the court power to issue extraordinary writs of amendments and prohibition. Also, fiat solves is durable, it's reciprocal, claim can be overturned. Our fiat is no different in its key to fairness. Courts will have the last word. Litvic 12, courts work has become one-sided. The Supreme Court is becoming even more powerful. Consequences of the current polarization has been a huge transfer of power to the Supreme Court. It is almost now, it now has the last word in decisions that invite a congressional response. Number of overrides has fallen to almost none. Also, court decisions are legally binding and enforced by the executive. As in Merrill 93, widespread agreement, the executive has a legal duty to enforce final judgments rendered by a court, regardless of whether the executives agree. Representatives' contemporary attitudes, approbations have followed. Nixon's decision to comply with judgment. Also, yes. Right. So, I mean, it basically links to all firms, because if you do it through any other means besides the courts, you're going to link to the midterm elections, which I'll go on in a second. Also, extend or slot make its legal 98 evidence, courts are invisible. They said that, it links to midterm. Well, our evidence specifically stated, including the evidence I just read, that courts have a unique position in the government which prevents it from being seen politically outside of having political ramifications, and also extend the role of pen evidence, which is courts can set policies. And this is very important because there's a historical precedence for this thing. We also, there's no test case needed. Courts are able to make decisions without them. Moving on to midterms, they're saying GOP win in, extend or Sabato 1029 evidence, which says GOP is likely to win. Also, they're saying GOP win inevitable. Well, this is true if all of the conditions of the political scene right now remain the same. But since they're trying to enact this plan, there's this massive shift in the midterm perceptions. And extend our YouGov 11 evidence, which says legalization is popular among Democrats. It will serve as a rallying point for Democrats, which will allow them to win. Also, prostitution universally attracts libertarians. This is Elroy 9. There is no disagreement among libertarians concerning prostitution. It is a peaceful activity in which government and law can serve no function. All libertarians recognize prostitution as a victimless crime. Also, libertarians want all restrictions on prostitution removed. This is Peterson 3. A new political movement wants liberty-minded individuals. Leaders of the movement hope to turn the state into libertarian haven, where laws regulating gambling prostitution will be eliminated. So basically, this will all go towards feeding the Democrats' support. And also, they're saying that it's that there's no impact because absentee ballots and early voting has already occurred. Well, fundamentally, that's not true. In cases, in specifically midterm, there's 7 seats that they need, and all 7 of those races are too close. Every single vote counts. So any change in the law or in the legislation that is enacted now will have drastic impacts. And as our cards have pointed out, that they will only help the Democrats, which will make it less likely for the GOP to win. Also, to extend our extend our agree 14 evidence, which says GOP is key to free trade. They didn't actually answer that. Also, extend our Farmer 8 evidence, which says protectionism causes extinction. So basically, they didn't actually answer this. This plan, if the act is passed the way it is, it will link to midterms. It will force the Democrats to win, which will prevent free trade, which can cause extinction as a result of protectionist policies. Going on to trafficking, extend our Zakira 13 evidence says terrorism is not a threat. Now they're talking about human rights, but their impact was terrorism, right? So if their impact is terrorism, and we're saying our Zakira 13 evidence says, terrorism is not a threat. Manzini 5 evidence says trafficking is inevitable, right? Trafficking is inevitable. Just because you legalize it, you don't stop trafficking. I'm just going to read a few cards on the fact that their solvency. Okay, I'm going to read trafficking. Plan causes more trafficking. This is LSC 12. Legalized prostitution increases human trafficking. Countries where prostitution is legal. Countries where prostitution is legal tend to experience a higher reported inflow of human trafficking than the countries in which prostitution is prohibited. So basically what we're saying is, if you legalize it, there's going to be more demand. If there's more demand for prostitution, you're going to have more people trying to come in and be prostituted. You're going to bring in more people through trafficking methods. Also, no impact to terrorism. Threats are low. Will be limited. This is Makili 12. Where are you? Al-Qaeda has not proved successful provoking the West in class civilization, nor has Al-Qaeda been become mass movement. The core organization of Al-Qaeda has not been significantly weakened. Al-Qaeda's ideology has lost movement support. Islamist extremist violence has not become an existential threat, as was frequently predicted after 9/11. Current counterterrorism policies are ineffective. Potential attacks are likely to be limited and conventional. Going on to the fact that they don't solve, the status quo understands are inherently gendered and flawed, based on sex-positive assumption for prostitution. Even legalizes paid rape. Pimps and Johns use legal inequalities and vulnerabilities of women to get them to sign contracts to be raped and strip them of agency. Legalized prostitution fails because it legitimizes violence and needs to be abolished as a whole. This is Bindle 7. Brothels, like little jail, look like little jails where women experience violent and sexual abuse okay, never mind. Got that card. Legalizing prostitution spurs increased human trafficking demand. This is Cho at 2013. One important largely neglected aspect of globalization with direct human rights impacts engaging is the increase in trafficking. Legal status of prostitution affects the incidence of human trafficking in closed countries. Most victims of international human trafficking and women's rights are girls. The vast majority end up being sexually exploited through prostitution. By prostitution, combating with the force of law would reduce trafficking. Legalizes actually suggests an increase in trafficking to meet the demand of women to be used. Also, human trafficking drastically increases the spread of disease. It's a global public health issue. So, they don't really solve health either because, by trafficking, you're naturally spreading disease across the world. Trafficking, this is Diamante and Papal 8. Trafficking is a global public health issue. Health issues they are ignored until they are critical or life-threatening. Long-term health unrelated issues such as cardiovascular, respiratory syndrome, diabetes, cancer, sexually present, sexually transmitted infections, human papilloma, antivirus, pelvic inflammatory disease, there. Also, all causes maintain illegal prostitution, lack of health and social services, law making Code 9. Even if sex work were legalized, many things might not change. There are still other legal codes such as loitering, trespassing, public notice, and narcotics, which we use to target sex workers, given cultural belief. Legalization would not likely eliminate the stigma. Also, going on to the health, we said extend our Rule Mark 6 evidence, which says that you can't check the purchaser's medical history, which is key because even though they're saying that you don't mandatory health checks, right? First, they're saying it's on brothels, but not with prostitution. But if the prostitutes are working in the brothels, how would that make any sense? And we also are extend our. So basically, if you're checking it in the brothels, you essentially mandatory checks for the prostitutes. That will force them to go underground because they don't want to pay all of the expenses necessary for that, for the checks, which will basically increase the disease spread. But furthermore, if you can't check the purchaser's medical history, you're not checking the entire other side of the spectrum. You're avoiding a whole other end. And once we extend our Burroughs Evan card, which says condoms are not always used, right? So if they don't use sexual protection, you can't check the purchaser's medical history, and you don't mandate, you mandate or you don't mandate, it's really unclear what you guys do with regards to health protections. You're not solving in any way this health issue. Also, going on to stigma really quick, they're saying that it will somehow change the stigma with related. Stigma associated with prostitution is not because it's illegal, it's because they're selling sex. How are you stopping this? There's no solvency there. If you say simply, hey, let's legalize it, people go, oh, it's legal now, so it must be okay. No, it's the fact that you're selling your body is what's causing the stigma. I think my time is up. Ready for questions? Yes.
Awesome.
Same that.
Okay, do you want to ask a question first?
Yeah. Are you conditional? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, so you're gonna kick out of something?
We have the options.
Okay. So can we know now what you're kicking out of? Because you don't have to tell us, but
We're not sure.
okay, that's fine. You're going for everything then.
No, we don't know what it is.
You don't know what it is you're kicking out of. Okay.
Okay. You extended your YouGov card that said that the legalization was popular among the Democrats. Would you say that 42% is the majority? No.
Oh, it's
Do
popular
you think
because.
42% is a majority?
Let me answer your question.
Exactly. Is 42% the majority?
Let me answer your question full. So really what we're saying is because the turnouts are so low in midterms, 42% is significant enough to cause a significant change. Also, extend the libertarian cards.
Right. Are libertarians necessarily going to vote Democrat?
Yes, because it's
Okay, all right. And then you talked about our absentee voting. If all of those votes on absentee have already been decided, how can you say that those 7 seats aren't going to be decided through that? How can you say that? How can you say absolutely that those 7 seats are still open?
Fundamentally, some seats are so close that every single vote counts, and any change even slightly in the political spectrum will cause a drastic shift, and we're seeing.
Okay, do you think that people, I'm on health, do you think that people want HIV?
They want HIV?
Do you want HIV?
No.
No? Do you think people want HIV?
No.
So if sex workers have access to HIV protection, why don't you think they would use it?
First of all-
Didn't you even say that a lot of people don't even know that they have HIV until after?
Exactly. Our plan says that we would, that it's
If
education.
you don't check, how would you solve?
No. Okay. I'll answer that in what I say, but what I want to know is if people have access to HIV prevention and education, why aren't they going to use it?
Fundamentally, we said there's multiple reasons.
What are those reasons?
One of them
A
is
huge-
monetarily.
Yeah, a huge one is that they're not going to make as much money.
Why not?
In regards to condom use, because simply clients do not want to use condoms, and first of all, you can't force condoms on people.
Like, can you not? Okay, our regulations. I just want you to explain why you don't think our regulations.
Okay,
are
well,
so this might not be a question, but our regulations say that the workers can force it within our health argument.
You
That they can.
literally,
So we say-
regardless of law, you cannot force somebody to wear a condom.
Okay,
I'm
regardless,
sorry.
you guys say you have regulations and then you don't say it's mandatory, so what kind of regulations are like?
Yeah,
it's
we're-
right
Okay,
now,
you
it's
did
right
that.
happening Saturday.
I'll address that in my argument because you did say we weren't clear, and I will clarify that, but I'm pretty sure we were clear already. But I'm just gonna rotate around. I don't have a lot of time left. Let's go on to stigma. You said the stigma was related to sex, but didn't you say already in your K that stigma was related to patriarchy? Which is the root cause, sex or patriarchy? Which is the root cause of stigma, sex or patriarchy? I'm gonna take some prep time for answering this. What is the root cause of stigma?
The root
You
cause
said in your
of-
K it was patriarchy, that patriarchy causes the oppression, which causes the stigma.
So prostitution is a form of patriarchy.
Actually, since this is cross-sex, we might let me answer, because I think he's the one who read it.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, I just want you to say one or the other. Is sex the root cause of patriarchy or of stigma? Is sex the root cause of stigma or patriarchy? Please choose one, because you can't say they're both. They're both the root cause. Okay, thank you, I'm done.
Sex is the big,
I'm-
that's how the
I'm-
patriarchy happened.
Thank you. That was about 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Thanks for your questions.
Are you all set, I presume? Or are you taking prep?
No, I'm good. I just got some of my time.
Okay. For future reference, it's a good practice to like be ready and have that switched over by the time the process is over, okay? It'll make judges very happy.
It's just entitled One in Our U Cards, or One in Our Cards.
Thank you.
So, okay, the roadmap is going to be, it's going to be A-spec, L-spec, and then the FemK.
That seems like shut up, you know.
Yes.
You go.
Okay, Clemens ready? Guys ready? Go on. All right, so first starting with A-spec, group all of their arguments about A-spec. First of all, like they're ridiculously confusing between mandating this federally versus like all states. So we're going to address the state part, which is what they say is their like official, I guess, agency or whatever. So why 50 state fiat is bad, and this is definitely a voter. First, for education, it skews the topic away from the actual merits of energy and policy and forces us to debate about the mechanisms that get out there. It's a utopian fiat. No 50 states have ever implemented one policy at the exact same time. Utopian fiat is bad and justifies banning energy dependence on the plan, and it justifies multi-actor fiat. It allows for them to access 50 unique state policies and it skews offense. Just to read the card, states can solve and link their terms. Links to midterms, perception of pandering to the rich causes public outrage. Smith 8, advances in prevention or treatment of organ regulation. Advances in the prevention and treatment of organ rejection led to more successful transplants and an increased legislation has been enacted in laws to prevent transplants distribution. Although several states have already passed organ donation laws, drafted them uniform it's the UAGA in 1968 to regulate organ donations among states. Americans were outraged, yet wealthy Americans were engaged to transplant tourism. As a result, Congress passed NOTA in 1984, 65, which banned the sale of human organs. What this is basically saying is that when you individually try and regulate something through the states, there's no way that everyone's going to agree, and if states do it, states are going to have to rely on what the citizens throughout the states are saying. There's no possible way that they can just assume that all 50 states are going to agree on this all at once. So then moving on to LSPEC. So what they had to say about LSPEC was that they weren't vague, and that all of the regulations were in their White 13 thing. Is that the only clear regulation that they have outlined there is that it's consensual adult prostitution should be officially recognized as work. They have time and time again said that there would be inherent regulations. They're not telling us what that actually is. There's no way for us to debate about regulations clearly. And the White 13 card clearly states that there's an agreement that prostitutes should not be registered and or licensed. So there's no way to actually keep track of these prostitutes and what they're going to do. They said that they cross-apply to their Brickmore to the health advantage. Or I would like to cross-apply that to their Ditmore in the health advantage, basically saying that there's no way that we would actually be able to keep track of these prostitutes and what it is that they're doing. So I guess go ahead and just go into the sex K. The status quo understandings are inherently gendered and flawed based upon a sex-positive assumption for prostitution. Even legalized as paid rape, pimps and johns use the inequalities and vulnerabilities of women to get them to sign contracts to be raped and strip them of agency. Legalized prostitution fails because it just legitimizes violence. It needs to be abolished as a whole. What we're saying, they say that we're just outlawing it. No, we are completely rejecting prostitution and patriarchy. That is completely different. We want it abolished. We want it abolished out of the human race system. This is completely different. They said that they cross-apply the stigma advantage over here, that stigma is inevitable, but no. The point is that the stigma cannot exist if prostitution does not exist. So Bindle 7 says that brothels are little jails, women experience violent sexual abuse from customers and pimps, and just to note, this is in the legalized prostitution in Nevada, which I know that they say they don't advocate for, but this is the example that you have in the United States to lean on. This is what's going to happen. Food was shoved through the door seal bars. One pimp starved a woman he considered too fat. Women had histories of abuse and mental illness. Most abuse is kids. Those who support the system claim regulations to prevent pimping, worse exploitation. Women in legal brothels have pimps outside anyway. Legal brothels owners are worse than any crime. They abuse and imprison women are fully protected by the state. It's like the pimp's own little police state. The sex industry, even legal, can be dangerous. Charlie asked the owner of the work as he explained business for his ladies. He whipped out a revolver and said, "You don't know nothing about Nevada prostitution, lady. You don't even know if I'm going to kill you in the next 5 minutes." Owners pocket half of the earnings. Women pay tips and other fees to staff. Finder's fees from the cab drivers. They pay for their own condoms, wet wipes, and use of sheets and towels. Farley found a shocking lack of services for women in Nevada wishing to leave prostitution. More than 80% interviewed wanted to leave prostitution. Many suffered traumatic effects of ongoing sexual assaults. Some were institutionalized. They were passive, timid, compliant, and deeply resigned. No one really enjoys getting sold. Quote, it's like you signed a contract to be raped. Legalizing this industry does not result in the closing down of illegal sexual establishments. It gives them further permission to exist. The solution is to educate people about the realities of legalized abuse of women and be persuaded that legal prostitution is an institution that just can't be fixed up or made a little better. It has to be abolished. So when they say things like, "Oh, it'll be okay because it'll all be regulated. There will be police cooperation." Again, if you look, especially at this the Bindle 7 card, they say that right now illegal prostitutes want legalization. This is what it looks like. 80% of these women want out and cannot get out, and this is already legalized. They have been through the legalization process, and it is still not helping them. Prostitution is only going to get worse when legalized, and when legalized, it's going to make the entire nation overlook the still illegalities that are working underneath it.
All right, we're going to take 5 minutes.
Which one?
Stop that, please. Item 210, is that the second one? Item 210. Oh, Tim, I'm actually going to start just really quickly, please.
Yeah.
All right, so 2.5.
Okay, I'm gonna go in order of our advantages: health, trafficking, stigma, addressing A-spec, L-spec, courts and fem are gonna go together, and I'll be doing a line by line with that in midterms.
Health, trafficking, stigma, A-spec, L-spec, then what?
Courts in the FemK,
Courts.
Midterms?
and then midterms.
And then midterm. Okay.
All right. They're missing our arguments from the Urban Justice Project. We're talking about health, education, and they're simply missing the fact that increased police relations, they will no longer be prosecuted, and that will help to solve for health because they don't have to fear that. They can go ahead and use condoms because it won't be used as evidence anymore. It's not about the fact they dropped the money argument. They just simply read the tagline, they missed the warrants behind it saying that money is the cause of that and why they don't wear condoms, and so we don't even have to worry about that anymore. We talked about that for health, it leads to extinction, and so because they didn't adequately address our impact for that, we can go ahead and say that that will outweigh. We talked about solving for half, and they just said it was simply going to be pushed underground. Why would it be pushed underground if we were giving individuals rights? As we said, there will be no mandatory health checks, so any evidence that they said about that doesn't apply. Now, on to trafficking. They dropped our human rights and moral obligation argument. That is the impact, and that is the impact that you have to go ahead and look at. They increased police relations, the sex workers are at the front lines, and because of that, they can help solve for other human rights abuses. They can bring those trafficked forward, and those being trafficked can therefore come out of that slavery. And as a human rights, as a moral obligation, we're not saying we're going to solve for all of terrorism, but we're saying that the solving for human rights helps us solve for terrorism. And go ahead and cross-apply their terrorism impacts that they had onto that, because at one point they said terrorism couldn't happen, at one point they said terrorism would happen, they simply just couldn't decide. So if you can agree with us that terrorism could happen, it is happening through ISIS, ISIL, and the World Trade Center. If that wasn't terrorism, I don't know what is. Onto stigma. We talked about the individual voices. Again, they're creating victimization. Instead, we want to give those rights to workers. Their only real arguments was that the stigma was inevitable. If that's true, their patriarchy case doesn't solve. Now, they said we don't have regulations. We're using the Queensland model. We're using the model in Australia. That's our Whites Are 13 card on solvency. And we went ahead and talked about there is no current pure policy of decriminalization, but that 70% of prostitutes would definitely choose it again in our model, and more than 50% found it as a major source of satisfaction. That was all in Whites Are. 79%, according to our Urban Justice Project, want this to be legalized. Now, onto A-spec. Group. Okay, go ahead and realize that we did specify in process. We did specify that it's going to be through the states. That's where the legal representation is. The argument that it's utopian fiat is moot because they too are using fiat, and they talk about fiat being good, so they can't go ahead and say that we can't use fiat because that takes away from our advocacy. Now, they said it justifies multiple actor, but they don't have any regulations for their counterclaim. Go ahead and cross-apply again their L-spec argument to their court's counterclaim. They drop that argument, which means that they concede that they lack the legislation specification, and therefore we solve better, and that's why you should prefer our claim, because we do have regulations for a Whites Are card. Now, their organ sales card does not apply. Their Smith evidence just simply doesn't relate to our plan. Now, again, we can do both for their court's counterclaim. Even if we legalize for the states, the courts can get involved. Really, there was no impact for their court's counterclaim other than saying, oh, well, it doesn't link to midterms. Why should we care if the courts do it? If the courts are invisible now, who cares? There's no test case, and also we can perm, do the plan, and then the counter plan. Onto the FemK. their show 13 card about increasing trafficking, that's a theoretical model, and it talks about how there is possibilities for decreasing trafficking. They simply just didn't talk about it because they didn't want to highlight it. Now, again, they dropped our terms. We can do both, and because we're rejecting patriarchy, because we're solving for all humans, we're solving for transgenders, we're solving for men, we're solving for female sex workers. It's not one group, and it's what they want. We can do the perm, do the plan, and the alts, which they also dropped. There's no reason we can't reject patriarchy. And we can do, even if they win that this is some sort of form of patriarchy, then we can perm do the plan and then reject all other instances. Now, we have brothel regulations, and they don't seem to understand that these don't include mandatory health checks. These are simply making the brothels safer. We're giving better access to the individual workers who want to work in brothels. They can also still be street sex workers, so it solves either way. We increase safety through health and education. They were missing those arguments. They simply said, oh, condoms aren't enough to solve. Even if condoms weren't enough to solve in itself, the health and the education and the basic human rights that these sex workers want certainly do. Now, they said that prostitution needs to be abolished. Prostitution is inevitable. Prostitution is going to happen either way. Sex work is the oldest profession, and they simply cannot deny that fact. As we talked about, prostitutes can leave the industry. Sex workers will be allowed to leave sex work if they want. That's what our plan would entail. Right now, they can't. Prefer our plan, and don't do it through the courts because that's simply not effective. Let's look at the plan versus the counter plan. Oh wait, there's two, they claim the two root cause, they can't have two root cause arguments. Is the root cause sex or is the root cause patriarchy and hierarchies? They can't decide which one is the root cause. And let's go ahead and just realize that it doesn't work together. You can only have one root cause. On to midterms. 42% of them, what's up?
Are you timing?
Yes, sir. 42% is not a majority. We talked about no vote switching. They have no internal link between their GRI card and their Panzer 8 card. Where do the Dems cause protectionism? They don't talk about that. And trade and protectionism are not the same thing, and trade doesn't lead to extinction. We talked about how the GOP one was inevitable. Thank you.
How much time is left? How much time is left?
Oh, we have 4 or 5. I have 4 or 5.
Really? I have 390.
What is it?
390.
Thank you.
Order, please.
Yep. I'm going to go with course counter plan, midterms, health, stigma, traffic.
When, I'm so sorry, when are you talking about the future? When was it?
Oh.
Okay.
What?
They're not talking picture, that's not
Right.
So the course midterms, health, stigma, traffic.
Are you prepping?
Yeah.
Good call. Because you're out of prep time. Are you ready?
Yep.
Let's go.
All right, starting with courts. First of all, you're going to address our perm. First of all, you can't perm do both because fundamentally they still link to the midterms DISAD, which is our net benefit. Supreme Court's extend our Siegel evidence, which says courts are invisible. They have a very unique unique place in politics in that they don't have political ramifications. They don't affect the midterms. We're saying the midterms races are too close. Therefore, it's a very important thing. Also,
this is not a utopian fiat.
yeah, this is not a utopian fiat like they're assuming all 50 states are somehow going to all at once make the same decision, which has never happened in history. Okay, also, I'm going to extend the role evidence, which also says Supreme Court action creates congressional follow-on. It seems like they conceded this. Courts, there's no rollback. There's no need for a test case as to extend our evidence, which says like there's sua sponte is a court term specifically, which says that they don't need a test case in order to make a decision. It's happened multiple times. There's multiple cases in history showing precedence of this case. Yeah, it's reciprocal. So they don't access, none of their firms can work because fundamentally if you're doing the app in this current form, it will link to midterms. And so these are, you cannot do both together. No firm will work. Moving on to midterms, they really didn't address much. I'm just going to reiterate, extend our Sabota evidence, which says, GOP is likely to win, and our YouGov evidence which says legal prostitution is popular amongst Democrats. Also extend the evidence I'm in the 2NC, which said that it's popular amongst libertarians, and libertarians would would vote for Democrats because that is who they would attribute the passing to. Also, they said there's no link between our GRI 14 and our protectionist cause of extinction. Well, fundamentally, we're saying that if GOP allows for free trade, that's the opposite of protectionism, right? So that's
Dems equal protectionism.
Yeah, Dems equal protectionism because they won't pass free trade, and protectionism will cause extinction. That's our former 8 card. They don't address our midterms really at all. It looks like they conceded most of it. So basically, it's very critical. Right now, the midterm races are so close. There's 7 seats and each vote counts. Historically, midterm elections have been super close. Every single change that occurs in the political spectrum will have ramifications. And we're saying that if the plan is passed, the way they are currently making it, it will cause the Democrats to win, and this will lead to extinction because of the lack of free trade. Moving on to health. First of all, they said that health education. Well, she asked me in cross-sex, like, do you want HIV? I said no. It's a common thing. You don't want HIV education. Everyone knows you don't want these diseases, right? And they also say, their White Series 7 card, which says that's how their regulations come from, according to them. First of all, that card is extremely vague, and it just says consensual adults. It's like it should be legalized, and then it should follow that sort of consensual adults are the ones doing the prostitution. But fundamentally, they're saying it's not mandatory, but it's a regulation. How does that work, right? You're going to have non-mandatory regulations, so basically the status quo, like here's a guideline. You shouldn't actually, you should have these health benefits, but we're not going to enforce it. If you don't enforce it, you don't access your impacts, and so fundamentally they don't do that. Also, they dropped our Bindle evidence, which says that prostitutes have to pay for everything that they do, and brothels take most of their income. So there's a huge monetary burden that is placed on prostitutes, which will force them to not take all the precautions that are necessary to prevent this disease spread. Also, they said that money cause and police relations will allow them to use condoms. Well, fundamentally, if it's money cause that stops them from using condoms, well, once again, using our Bindle evidence, it makes it impossible for them to actually use these protectionary measures. And they dropped their evidence which said that prostitution makes legal prostitution pushes prostitutes underground because they cannot afford the monetary. So you're just increasing the amount of illegal. You don't solve. You don't have your impacts. And also they dropped their evidence which said that they can't.
So everyone needs to flow better, okay? Y'all aren't paying attention to what your partners are arguing, and that ends up costing the round at the end, because like this should have been a pretty easy affirmative ballot, but I have to vote negative in this round. So like when you flow really well, and you know what your opponents answered and don't answer, the first things that you go to are what your opponents don't answer, and you make those a big, big deal. In this case, that would be the permutations, right? They never answer the perms, okay? Like, come on, what's going on here, right? You answer the Supreme Court counterplan, you don't say anything about the perms. Hannah, you answer like the FMK, you don't say anything about the perms, right? You're all like, maybe this will go away. Luckily, it did, all right? That never happens, okay? Your negative strategy, you have spread yourself far too thin, okay? You need to get out of A-spec and L-spec in the block. You don't want to talk about that at all in the 2NC, all right? You don't want to. I don't want to hear about it in the 1NR, all right? Because like it's not a round winner. They're very clear. They're like, yeah, we do 50 states. Oh, regulations here. Here's a card that specifies what regulations are going to happen. That's pretty clear. Like there is not a lot of reasons that you can like whine, not whine really, but like whine and be like, oh, they cheated, right? Like, because like you have evidence, right?
Yeah.
It's not like this is like some, oh my God, this is a weird case out of left field. No, dude, it's just legalized prostitution. Either it's good or it's bad, right? And if you get rid of that stuff in the block, you have more time to do things like answer permutations, right? Because that's a big deal, right? So like on your end, like all you need to do in the 2AR is be like, extend the perm. They never answered it. They answered it once in the 2NR. That's too late, right? Game over, right? You can do both. That's all that matters. Your answer to the perm in the 2AR is, you can't do the perm, or no, we can still do the perm because we don't link to midterms. Those are separate questions, right? Midterms is over on midterms.
Okay.
All right?
So it wasn't sufficient? Okay.
No, it's not an answer, right? Because like in the 1AR, it's just like extend perm, do the plan, and then the counter plan. The better perm, by the way, would be do the counter plan than the plan, right? Because if the Supreme Court's invisible, then that doesn't link to midterms, and then you can still do the plan afterwards.
Doesn't that mean that they should win now?
No,
Okay.
because you can still do both.
As long as we can do both somehow.
As long as you can do both somehow,
Yeah.
then it is not competitive, right? Then the counterplan is not competitive. It's not mutually exclusive.
Yes.
So I can do both somehow. Your answer to perm do the plan and the counterplan is that this is an intrinsic perm, right? Because the word then, like when you say one then or X then Y, the word then is neither in the counterplan nor the plan. That means they are adding things that are neither in the counterplan nor the plan. That makes the perm intrinsic, right? That's not fair. Because then you can say, perm do the plan, or perm do both and abolish war. Well, crap. What does that do for your midterm CA, right? That's not much. That's like kind of crummy, right? So that would be unfair, right? So using the time frame thing is unfair to you. And there, I'm sure, like you have a theory block that says intrinsic perms are bad, and you'd be like, oh yeah, those are bad, right? You also say this thing like, can't do it all through 50 states fiat. This is all coming I cannot draw a line from all this 50 states fiat stuff from the 1AR on the counterplan to the 2AR. Also, it's not really impacted. I mean, like, I don't see how your fiat is more immediate with the 50 states rather than their fiat honest. What they're claiming is like they don't need a test case, it's a sua sponte decision, right? Which means that they don't need a test case. The court spontaneously makes a decision. Like there's a lot of reasons why that can be harmful, but that's not the problem, okay? So that means that 100% of the case gets solved with the court, okay? There's no solvency deficit that's like brought up, okay? So then you look to midterms to see if there's a net benefit. There's barely a net benefit. I don't think the GOP win inevitable card is what you want to be reading. You want to be reading that the Democrats will win, or the Democrats have a much better chance, or something along those lines, right?
Right.
Whether or not that's true or not, whatever. The absentee stuff, like that makes a little bit more sense. I did it online, it's all in. It makes more sense, it reduces the risk. However, like you're not going to lose 100% risk of the DA, right?
And we needed offense, something saying Dems, but now it didn't have an answer.
You need offense saying that like plan is unpopular and would cause the GOP to win even harder.
Okay.
Okay, that would be offense. So like, there's a risk of the disadvantage. You guys need to explain your impacts more, right? You're like, because that'll cause extinction. How, right? How is the protectionism going to cause extinction? All right, this is not in a thing that where it's like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. Like literally, like after like the 2 NR, I go like this, which means this round should be over. All right, this is what like my boss's like little child does when she's done eating. She goes like this.
Oh, I know probably that.
Right, and it's also like I guess it's also American Sign Language for all done. Right, so that's how I was feeling. I'm like, all done. This should be over. All you have to do is extend the perms. Have a nice day. You don't do that. All right, like go to where they aren't. Don't go to where they are. All right.
I forgot.
So that's a big deal. Also, I do not understand why you're running this social death advantage. At all.
The stigma?
Yeah.
It's a time waster. I get really freaked out.
No. It's something that
Does
will.
it make sense?
No, it
You
makes.
guys like the how I go over?
No. The advantage makes perfect sense. You cannot run it with the other things that you're running.
No?
You cannot be like, these people are being victimized, right? And that's causing social death. Oh, by the way, they've all got HIV and they're being sex trafficked. Your first two advantages do exactly what your third advantage says is bad.
Okay, so like even if we, because we try to word
What do you
like,
mean by that?
the health.
I mean, like, your whole thing is saying, like, these people are stigmatized, right? Like, they are portrayed in a light that is negative, right? And sex work shouldn't be like that. However, your first two advantages portray sex workers as unhealthy and victimized through sex trafficking and not having their own agency, right?
Okay.
That is the social death that your third advantage talks about.
Okay.
So, like,
So even if we solve for all simultaneously, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No. They're saying that the rhetoric that is being used about sex traffickers, like you're saying, like we can do things in the round, right?
Right. Yeah.
What you're doing in the round is exactly what your third advantage says not to do,
Okay.
right? Because what you're doing in the round says like these people are
Oh, I see what you're
diseased,
saying.
right? These
Okay.
people all have HIV, right? They need our help.
The stigma linking back.
We need to have this like paternal sort of like we need to help them, right? They're being sex trafficked. They don't have like any choice in what they're doing, and like this is really bad, and like these people are like screwed, and like they're socially dead,
Yeah.
which you don't want, right? Yeah.
I've recognized that before. I mean, I didn't think it was that much of an issue. I think what I thought would counter it is the voices argument, where we say like we have cards saying that this is what they want. If we had extended that, explained it a little bit, would that have overcome it? Like sex workers realize they're in a position of social death, they don't like it, they think that legalization would solve for like health education and like stigma and whatever.
You have to have different reasons.
Okay.
All right, like you can't say like we shouldn't be having this rhetoric of victimization surrounding them. By the way, they're all diseased,
Okay.
right? I mean, like it just doesn't work. You need different reasons or a different way of doing it.
I understand.
If I mean, like for me, like if I'm on the other team, I'd be like, okay, grant out like advantage 3 on stigma. I'm going to say things how they're not diseased and how they're not sex trafficked, and at least I reduce the stigma better than you do, and I'm going to win the stigma advantage and like straight turn it,
Okay.
right? And even if like I'm wrong on the disease portion and stuff like that, the stigma I'm going to say is more important, and I'm going to win that advantage, right? And then my counterplan I can run because like I run the counterplan for reasons different than what you said. I run the counterplan just for stigma, right? And like I'll still end up solving for your other advantages, but like at least I don't talk about it in the way you do,
Okay.
right? Okay, Hannah, you're just rereading tags when you're doing your overviews and stuff like that. Just
Okay.
don't bother doing it.
Okay.
All right, just like a couple of sentences, like obviously you're spread for time, a couple of sentences explaining the advantage should be sufficient. Focus on winning perms. 2AR was confused, disorganized, wasn't around winning 2AR. Okay. Timothy,
Yes, sir.
why do you have advantages, solvency, then another advantage? And I realized like, oh, it's a time waster, but a time waster that you don't really want to run right. Okay. Kumar, you spread yourself way too thin in the block. You don't answer the perms, which I already said. Reading new evidence on case is not advised in the 2NC. It's just a bad idea, because like if you don't do that, then you able to adjust the perms, right? Laura, I don't know why you're doing these spec arguments when they specify pretty clearly in cross-X. Also, a worse idea to keep them in the block. You are winning the time skew, all right? Like, they spent a lot of time on those spec arguments that you didn't spend a lot of time putting out. Like, that's it, right? All done. Like, don't keep them in there for no good reason, right? Yeah, you were winning the time skew. Now you made it awkward. The 50-state fiat thing in the block is a poor idea. If you want to say 50-state fiat's bad, then say it like right off the bat, right?
Okay.
Because they said we're doing 50 states, right? So if that's bad, it's bad in the 1NC. It's not just bad in the 2NC.
Okay.
Or the 1 and R.
Right.
Okay.
Did I miss anything in the 1AR?
Did you miss anything on that?
Yeah, I tried to.
I like you.
Should I kick out a stigma by then? Should I just kick it and address?
There's no reason to address A-spec and L-spec at all.
Okay.
If you had turns on the FemK, that would be awesome. Otherwise, who cares? They dropped it. Midterms, you don't have any offense. Kick out of an advantage.
Okay.
Why do you keep all 3 advantages? I don't know. Kick out of an advantage that you don't need to like really fight, right? Be like, all right, maybe I don't solve trafficking, and be like, you know, if this is inevitable, if trafficking is inevitable, that's fine, but like at least I don't increase it, right? And that way you get out of that turn.
So the turn for the K, when I applied it to the counter plan, was that not enough? Like saying that the K, their FemK, all the evidence on the FemK should be applied to the counter plan.
That's what you said, right?
Yeah.
All the evidence on the FemK should be applied to the counterpart.
How do I
That doesn't
explain
explain anything to me. There's no explanatory power on that, right?
I understand.
You got to do more work than that if you're trying to like be like, sweet, all this stuff, right? That's like being like at the end of your speech being like, oh yeah, and pull through all my cards. I ain't like, come on, right? You gotta have more explanatory power than that. But on the course counter plan, you were really light. Like you extend the perm and you said something about there being no impact, which I don't even know what that means. Counter plans don't have impacts, right? So I'm like, okay, there's no impact. And then you pull through the perm, which is the only thing that you really need to do, right? It would be better if you explained it a little more, but the only thing you really need to do is like, hey, perm's not answered, game over, awesome. And then you gotta tell Hannah, check it out, perm's not answered, this is game over, this is the only thing you need to go to, right? Yeah, you should go to other things, right? But like, that's the #1 most important thing, okay? Dropped arguments are the #1 most important thing. If you flow well, those dropped arguments are really, really apparent, right? Because like there's an argument that you have and then there's nothing next to it, right? So like that makes it really easy to be like, oh sweet, here's the stuff that I need to go for first, and then if there's other stuff, then I'll go take care of that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay?
Appreciate it.
I have another question. So yeah, like I meant to adjust the perms on the sex K. Had I done that effectively, could we have gone to the sex K and it turned out a little bit better?
The FemK?
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, like the perms don't work because like the whole thing, like, I mean, like,
Yeah.
your link is specific, right? So like, but you have to answer that and be like, look, our link is specific on this, like this is why you can't do both. We're saying that there's like this automatic bad starting point because like legalizing prostitution, like is just enabling patriarchy, right? So like that's why you can't do both, right? And the other one is like when they're saying like do the perm or do the plan, then the alt in all other instances, that is intrinsic, right? Because like that's adding something that's neither in the plan nor the counterplan. They're saying like, do this, then this, right? That's not fair, right? So yeah, that's crummy. And so they say perm do both, do the plan, then the all, do the plan, and reject all other instances. Both those last two are intrinsic, right?
Yeah. So suppose hypothetically we extended or like answered the perm on both the FEMK and the court's counterplan. Which one would have been the better argument to go for in the 2NR? Do you think? Like, which one was? Do you think was
Which one was better?
Yeah.
You were in a better position if you had answered the perm on the courts. And like, then your 2NR should just be like, right? So like, if you're trying to solve, check this out, all right? If you're going for the counterplan, you're trying to solve for their advantages, why the hell are you spending any time fighting their advantages?
Okay, I was just looking
Right?
at
You're trying to solve for their advantages.
Right.
You want there to be like a big problem, because if you solve for it, awesome. So the only thing you need to go for is course counterplan, disadvantage. That's it. That's it, right? Because like you're granting out by running the counterplan, you're granting out and saying yes, there's a problem, right? And a problem that we need to solve, right? Because like if you win the advantages of the course, then it's like what does the course counterplan solve for?
Right. Okay.
Nothing, right? So that makes you more efficient and makes it like, oh wow, look at all the time I have to answer all this stuff, to explain the story, to explain how protectionism actually causes extinction, right? To say like, hey, this is why this firm sucks, right? So like, there's no reason in the 2NR for you to be doing any case arguments if you're trying to show that the counterplan is solving 100% of cases.
Okay.
Right?
That makes sense, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.